In the heart of the state-of-the-art, at the dawn of the next stage in entertainment, you found No Proscenium.
You have indeed found No Proscenium, the voice of everything immersive. I'm your host, Noah Nelson, coming to you from Los Angeles, and welcome to episode 366. This week on the show, this is a big one. Felix Barrett, the Artistic Director of Punchdrunk, is here to talk about The Burnt City, currently playing in London. But that's not all. We get into the state of the London immersive scene. We talk LARPS, Punchdrunk's own experiments with immersive gaming, video games, and of course, the origins of Punchdrunk itself, amongst other things. I'll tell you straight, I was nervous as heck about going into this because Felix and I had never talked before we hopped on this internet call. And I shouldn't have been. Not only is this the biggest interview of the year for us, but it's also one of the best in ages. I'm so excited to get you to it. But we do have a few things to take care of first. While we're talking about London, No Pro Patreon backers should look to their Patreon feed because we have a special 20% discount off for 2 nights at Rematch's Rumble in the Jungle coming up in February 28th and March 1st. Those are the 2 nights. This is a recreation of the iconic fight between George Foreman and the greatest himself, Muhammad Ali, conjured through projection mapping blended with performance and surrounded by a festival atmosphere that aims to capture the vibe of Fight Night 1974. If you've had a chance to look at what Rematch has done before, they did Wimbledon 1980, and let me tell you, I was agog at how they blended projection mapping and performance. Very exciting stuff. Big thanks to No Pro sustaining backer Richard Ayers for hooking us up with this. Backers, check the feed. Speaking of Patreon backers, we remain on the right side of the halfway mark of our $5,000 a month funding goal. So we're over $2,500. We're marching forward. Right now, we're also just 13 shy of the 400 backer mark. You might remember we were like 5 shy before, and of course, slip back, slip forward, slip back, slip forward. That's the name of the game on Patreon. Can we get there this month? Can we get those 13 backers to get us to that 400 mark? Well, we will if we get more support like the kind that we're seeing from returning sustaining backer Samuel Mustri, along with new backers Jordan Renda and Devin. And also some boosts in support we got from Lara Marson and Jonathan Pedigo. Thank you all. Remember, I like the $5 a month setup myself. I like to see a wide set of support just because it not only does it feel good, it also feels a lot more sustainable when we're offering all this up for less than the cost of a fancy latte. I'm not even sure if it's more than a Starbucks latte at this point, because anyway, that's all that. No Pro survival is in the hands of all of you. We've got to keep moving the goalposts forward to hit episode 400 and beyond. And that's coming up. That is coming up. All right. If you can, please jump in and back us at www.patreon.com/noproscenium. And if you already do, or times are tight like they are for me, take a moment to drop us a review on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice and help spread the word. It's silly, but it really helps. As we watch Twitter fall apart, we're going to need even more help to get the word out there. Spread this thing. Spread this episode in particular. Spread it on LinkedIn. Spread it on Facebook. Anywhere you go and are. If you like it, and I know you're going to like it, let everyone know that we do this work. I am dead serious. The wider we cast the net, the better it is, not only for us, but for all of the smaller companies whose work we cover, all of the folks looking to gain an audience. This is why we do what we do, to help those creators that you love. So help them, help yourself, help us all. Spread this episode around. All right, enough. Gonna have plenty about all of that in a bit. Gonna talk about the dig, which was this past weekend. Gonna get it all, but right now, just gonna give a big thanks to our sustaining backers. Samuel Mustri, welcome back, Samuel. Chris Woolman, Samantha Davison, Eric Shamlin, Elaine, Jay Bushman, Jerome Joseph Gentes, Wynn Thorne, David Bassick, Richard Ayers, Lonnie Hands-On, Sidney Guillory, and Jan Budman. Thank you for keeping us going. I'll be back on the other side of this. Oh, here we go. Here we go. For most people who listen to the pod, our guest today needs no introduction. But for the handful who do, Felix Barrett is the Artistic Director of Punchdrunk, the creators of The Burnt City in London and Sleep No More, the show that started the ball rolling on what we here call the immersive renaissance, and which is currently playing in New York City and Shanghai. Felix, it's an honor to have you here on the podcast.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
This is gonna be fun. First off, I wanted to congratulate you and the team for getting The Burnt City out into the world. From what I understand, this one was a long time coming. Am I right?
Oh, blimey, yeah, completely. I think before the word immersive was doing the rounds, we would, in fact, we've always thought of ourselves as a sort of site-sympathetic theatre company, and we would always have no idea what show we were going to do until we went into the building. And I went into a building in 2010, which was actually two buildings linked by a theatre. One was like a 60s sort of futuristic or a 60s vision of the future, and one was a Victorian old crumbling pile. And we knew we wanted to do something Greek and thought, oh my gosh, two buildings, let's do the Fall of Troy. And then the building, as is often the way, fell away. We lost the show. And it's taken this long to get it on. So yes, that's 12 years.
Oh my goodness. 12 years chasing from walking into one building. Do you ever regret that you walked into that building?
Well, no, weirdly, I think it's the most magical part of the job. It's like walking into a building for the first time. And this is definitely the first time that we've lost a show, because we've lost many along the way, and then managed to sort of revive it because the fates were looking out for us. And here in Woolwich, we have two buildings again. We just had to build the link ourselves. So the gods were looking after us.
Because there'd long been rumors about the Fall of Troy show, and like it was here, it was there, it was everywhere,
Yeah.
and then nowhere. And when you finally announced that you're actually opening it, I was so relieved for you guys, because chasing something for so long, it can feel like a bit of smoke or like an illusion, like it's and then to bring it in after so long has got to be kind of ecstatic, really.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's like the ephemeral tendrils of mist or of haze in a building, and you can see it, and then you touch it, and it evaporates. That's what this show has felt like at times. So it's amazing to finally have got it concrete and open. And I suppose what's also more exciting for us as a London theatre company is to have our own building now. So we've also not only got the show, but we've also got a studio space. So we're going to sort of start to unpack like what can we scratch away at whilst running this show. So it's amazing to have been able to put down roots in our home city.
I want to get into London in a minute, but before moving on from the Burnt City, aside from the long, road to get it up, what were you chasing creatively during this process? Because I've got to imagine this is the biggest show you've done in some time, and there had to have been lots of just ideas and passions that were coursing through the company. So what do you feel like you were chasing when you finally got down to building the show?
Well, we knew we wanted to get to the Greeks because we were trying to do a sort of a show that we could sort of settle into in London. And we knew that because we've got an audience here who knows the work, we need to make sure it was as dense and as deep as it was wide. And the Greeks are sort of the ultimate source material because, the bedrock of Western theatre, and there's just so much in there. I think I'm still a sort of frustrated classics scholar that never studied it. But just when you're dealing with something that's about the supernatural world hitting the world of mortals and big, weighty issues, and it's almost like all stories are held within the Greek canon. So I think it was really our opportunity to look at um, like the origin story of all theatre, as it were. The stories that inspired Shakespeare came from this source material. So we were sort of going back to the beginning. Um, and yeah, gods, monsters, mortals, heroes, it's all there. So it was just a chance to do a deep dive.
There is something of like sort of a packed-in fractal to the Greek legendarium and the myths. You're right in that it is kind of all there and can kind of put a drop of water on it and it unfolds like one of those little paper sculptures.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a
so
beautiful way of putting it.
when you approach creating a world that big, and I know you guys have a sort of a syncretic method at points, like pulling in different elements. What
Yeah.
did you find yourself drawing on that wasn't the Greeks to connect to the modern audience?
Well, I think we'd always had, ever since 2010, when we first started thinking about this project, we historically always look back, and everything's got a sort of nostalgic veneer, sort of that hazy dream world, the ghosts of the past. And with this, we always wanted to sort of look forwards. And there's something about when you're dealing with Troy, this sort of fabled metropolis, this legendary city, did it even exist? Um, that sort of pushed us into sort of future dystopias, probably subconsciously via Metropolis, the Fritz Lang movie, because for me that was the sort of source that started um, kick-started all dystopic sci-fi. Its influence across cinema, fiction, all artwork is really evident, and it's sort of the touch paper that sort of propels you into all of these visionary worlds. So we wanted to be inspired, imagine what a sort of punch-drunky future noir landscape would look like. Whilst also, because it was written, well, because it was made in the 20s, and it's a byproduct of that time, being able to sort of look backwards as well into the 20s and the space Germany between the wars, that period in time when there was such creative fertility in Germany because of the impact of the Great War. Like, just imagining a city under duress, but that becomes a creative hotpot. It was all of those sort of starting points that drew us to it. But definitely, it was the idea of a sort of a visual landscape, a palette that we hadn't gone to before, that was really alluring.
I want to open the iris a little bit here, and talk about London. You've got your new headquarters, your new facility. At the same time, it feels like there's more shows and experiences that are labeling themselves as immersive in London than there
Yeah,
ever have been. Uh,
totally.
what do you make of the scene being like this? This feels, I'm not there, but just judging from my team on the ground, I'm getting the vibe that it's more intense than it was back when you were doing the Drowned Man or Cabaret or anything before. It's just a fundamentally different scene. Am I wrong on that?
No, I think firstly it's fantastic that it seems like the scene has exploded and there's so much more work happening, and it's just brilliant to see um, makers out there creating. It's you can yeah, it's weird. As when we were doing Sleep No More in Shanghai, you could feel on the streets this electricity, and there was a desire to create. And weird, there's a touch of that now in London. I think post COVID, people just want to, the idea of tactility and being close to performers felt quite illicit, and now suddenly it's bounced back with a vengeance. Um, but I think what's interesting is also this sort of theatrical mechanics have shifted, and it's
Mm.
become more, I think, back in the day, maybe back in the noughties, it was more of a sort of live art sensibility. It was coming from a place of, art, exhibition, installation, the durational. And now I think it's shifted into more of a nightlife scene. It's far more sort of drinking culture has sort of impacted it. It's like, where do you want to go and have the best night out? And then that's the sort of shows that are on offer. A sense that you can be pulled into a sort of hinterland of nighttime activity. And I think that's a definite shift. So the actual sort of a tonal shift in the kind of work.
So a shift in the work, and maybe also a shift in who the audience is?
Oh my gosh, completely. What's so interesting is we've seen the audiences who've never seen in one of our shows, because we haven't done a show here in this city for 8 years, probably. And so they're coming, holding hands with each other. Actually, they're coming with the same sort of skill set that we would have for a more sort of party style show, where it's coming to drink and play and participate and have adventures. And I think actually what's interesting is that we're trying to encourage our audience to separate and be by themselves, which is kind of in opposition to some of the mechanics of other shows. So it's interesting, we're having to sort of re-educate our audience about how you do Punchdrunk shows in comparison to other work out there. So it's exciting. It's just brilliant. There's so much happening, but it's funny how we're having to teach a different vocabulary to our crowd.
That kind of segues into something that I've always been interested in, this idea of teaching the audience the vocabulary and sort of how prepared they are for this kind of experience. Because sometimes, I've watched when immersive first pops up in a city, audiences be incredibly timid, like they don't know that they can walk across the room. They kind of have to be led, by like a sheepdog, to know that they have agency. And I've always noted that, you've talked about in the past about the influences of video games on your work. And we know that your work has in turn inspired game makers. I'm wondering, do you think that Punchdrunk could exist without a couple of generations worth of audience who grew up playing video games?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, and I actually do, because I think it would be a more limited crowd. I think essentially where we came from as a company literally when I was when I was an undergraduate wanting to make installation-based theatre, I was in turn responding to, I suppose, the happenings of the 60s. I wasn't there, but I just read about them. And just as theatre as event. But what I was exposed to, again, not by seeing, but by knowing it was happening, were the site-specific sort of interventions that were happening across London and New York in the 90s. So Deborah Warner's Angel Project, which sort of famously took over a disused space and populated it with performers as angels. And it was very much sort of durational performance. So it's the language of the gallery, it's the language of the art world, and those sorts of what was formerly called performance art. I think that's where we came from as a company. And I think, so that's kind of what I wanted, what I was seeing as theatrical landscape that you could explore, but it was, the museum come alive to explore in your own time. And so I think there's definitely a crowd who understood that sort of vernacular, and that's the way they'd approach it. But when we started making it, that was also the era when the internet was coming of age, and suddenly the audience was getting used to having whatever thoughts and desires they wanted were only a couple of clicks away. But also, that was when the PS1 was becoming the PS2, and suddenly open world video games were just starting to come in. And I remember playing Resident Evil 1 around at my friend's house before I went to university, and just marveling at the sort of cinematic quality of it. And I didn't actually want to play it, I wanted to watch it and be in the world of it. So I think even though it's an art world initiative initially, because we brought the sort of language of video games, that sort of crept in. But it really, the defining point for me was actually, because we never actually set out to do something which you borrowed from video games. It was just what we were absorbing as we peripherally went through, our creative lives. But it was only when in New York in 2011, when the Sleep No More had opened, when they were doing the end of the year roundups, that they were sort of talking about, favorite theatre show of the year, favorite game of the year, that one critic gave us that, the best video game of the year. And we couldn't believe that someone was talking. At first, it was like, well, this is ridiculous. But then the way they actually described the mechanics of the show, swapping out, one-on-ones for Easter eggs, swapping out, just the open world sensibility, we realized that the overlaps are huge. And well, that was also when the immersive world was really starting to gain traction. And prior to that, it kind of existed in tech and video gaming. And
Right.
so that synergy was really starting to crystallize. So I think, and that's brought the audience with it.
It almost feels like because there was the term immersive sim. You had games like Deus Ex and
Yeah,
the kind of stuff that Warren Spector worked on, and
yeah.
then the sandbox idea and all of that. I mean, all that terminology we use when talking about this work now. And it feels like it started there. It's also one of the things I always find funny when people get nervous or feel buzzwordy about the immersive word. I'm like, yeah, but it comes from games. It was already there. Like, everyone calm down.
Yeah.
Like it does have meaning. It has legacy. I mean, it's just a term, so it may move on one day. What matters more is
Oh,
the work and the impact.
I think it will move on though. I've been so excited to say this sort of because I really feel it profoundly. But we are in the days of the horseless carriage, where
Mm.
there will be a new word which articulates the future of this sort of practice, which will sort of more sort of literally fuse together video game mechanics and live action, and how do you sort of increase the agency of an audience member within these worlds? Because I think it's just an inevitable byproduct of, if the immersive scene has sprung out, it's almost an accidental live action video game illusion. What happens when we stop doing it deliberately?
Do you find yourself diving into LARPs at all? Like, as a person, do you go engage in that world ever?
Do you know what? That sounds kind of one of my regrets, is that I've never given myself the time to go and do them. Because I think I would learn loads and I like the idea of them. But one block for me with a LARP is the fact that you need to suspend your disbelief and you need to pretend. So you need to take a character that you inhabit. So it's inherently laden with artifice because you're having to go in as your character. I think what's interesting for us and the sort of Punchdrunk approach is that we want audience to never to be a really instinctual experience. You need to be yourself inside the environment. So it's always about how we would never want someone to have to sort of suspect, to have that layer, that buffer of pretending to be another, because I feel that it would be a psychological block. Like when we were doing, the mask is one device that allows the audience to sort of be contextualized within the work, but the other way to do it is just to sort of be yourself, but out of context. When we were doing a Crash of Elysium, which was our Doctor Who show that we did for kids about like 10 years ago. Now it's crazy, but this form will come back imminently, I hope. That had no mask, and it wasn't a LARP as such because it was children going on an adventure, but just not knowing that the LARP was around them. So it started off where we advertised it to parents, so they were told not to tell their children what they were going to see. So if your child's a Doctor Who fan, book this ticket, don't tell them. And then we built a false front for it, which was the most boring museum exhibition we could come up with, about a sunken ship that had been dredged up off the coast of Manchester. And there were a few artifacts, like an old mug and part of the ship's, hull. And we cast he's a lovely man, but like the most sort of dry, I wouldn't say boring, but kind of a performance possible, deliberately. So the audience, the children, were so painstakingly bored, like eye-wateringly bored, that they were sort of holding on to their parents, saying, "Please, can we leave?" And just at the point where they're literally about to weep with frustration at their Saturday afternoon being destroyed by their parents' pick of exhibition, the alarms fire, like the power fails. There's a cacophony of sirens, and the military come in and say, "People, we need everyone to stay calm. We have a major crisis here. We desperately need your help. We need everyone over the age of 12 to take a step back. Children, we can't tell you what's going on, but we desperately need your help. We need you to come with us now. You've got 20 seconds to say goodbye to your parents. We're moving out."
Oh my God.
And that was the start of the show. And it wouldn't have worked if the parents hadn't been in on it, because
Right, obviously.
but that principle of the children being plunged into an adventure, but playing themselves in an adventure. And so we marched the children out, and then suddenly behind the museum, there's a major quarantine zone with military, the works, towers, blockades. They go into a sort of a porter cabin unit. They get put in a hazmat suit and get a full briefing by the military to explain that an alien spaceship has crash landed here and they need to gain passage to it, but adults can't get on board. Only children can do it. And they have an immediate briefing. We're having to move. And they would play. They go to the crash site and show you the black box recorder that has a message from the ship's doctor. And it's only at this point which is about 25 minutes into the show, that they play the relay from the black box recorder from the crash ship, and the ship's doctor is Doctor Who, which is the first clue that it's fictional. And that's, I suppose, when the audience, the children, can relax into it, know that it's a show. And I suppose when it comes to LARPing, it feels like that's our ambition as a company, to try and, rather than having to pretend you're going through it or pretend you're a character, it's yourself experiencing it. So it's a very long-winded way of me being nostalgic about past shows, but
we live for that here. That's there's sometimes I think that's mostly what the audience, and half the times what I want is like, tell me about a show I never saw.
Also,
because I can see it,
Yeah, I know that show, we only did it for a brief run because it was back in the day and it was pre-Sleep No More, actually. No, it's actually just Sleep No More just opened. But we will definitely go back to that form because it's actually as precious to me as the mask shows are. It's just a completely different performance language.
Well, and in both cases, this idea of being allowed to be yourself in this fictional space. And I know that, I have a theater background. I did a lot of LARPing in college, but it was that weekend that I went to New York and I saw Sleep No More and I caught Then She Fell on the same weekend.
Yeah.
And it was coming out of those two shows that I saw what I saw as the evolved form of what I had been doing in LARPing, which was, like you said, not having the artifice of character, not having a responsibility to carry along objectives or a plot. All I had to do was just react authentically.
Yeah.
And as someone who had done a lot of theater, done a lot of improv, it was really relaxing to not have the responsibility of carrying the show, but just needing to just respond honestly to the performers in front of me with whatever was going through me at that moment. And that felt like that freed them up to respond honestly in the structures they had been given.
Yeah.
And it felt like I finally found what I'd been chasing for all those years. And I know it varies for people. There are some people who very much, there's some folks I think who think the LARP form is like, the Ne Plus Ultra, but for me, there's something almost like you're touching the sublime when you're able to just be yourself in one of these fantastical situations.
I mean, that's beautiful. I think that's kind of what I feel too, is like, the sublime ecstasy of just being able to float through it because you're working on a completely instinctual level. Like, ideally, although I would hope these shows are cerebral and you can process it afterwards, when you're in it, it's purely that sort of in the immediacy of pure response. It's like just the left-hand side of the brain that you're operating on. So it becomes a completely truthful response. What's so interesting is, you talking about like you didn't want the weight of objectives and missions and things. And it's funny that now here I am thinking about how we fold all those in whilst maintaining the sort of the floating dream world of it. Is it possible? The question we often ask ourselves here is that is it possible to have both those two forces simultaneously, or are they in opposition?
I mean, that's a real trick, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Like, how to instill that sense of purpose without making it feel like it's a checklist.
Yeah, we did
You
an
know?
interesting when we did Mask of the Red Death in London. This is way back, 2007. It was a collection of Edgar Allan Poe short stories that we put in one building, sort of 8 short stories, and the 90% of it functioned like a sort of a conventional Punchdrunk mask show with audience free roaming and choosing their characters and narratives. But Edgar Allan Poe, something I only learnt when we were researching it, actually invented the treasure hunt, and
Mm.
his story, The Gold Bug, was the first classic X marks the spot tale, and he sort of massively popularized it. So at one point when we were planning the show, we were thinking, wow, this is really juicy. If you're doing his body of work, this is a sort of a subgenre that we need to touch upon. And we thought about how we could stage it. It's not very interesting to to see a character, finding a map and then realizing there's a skull and having to drop a gold bug through the eye of the skull and finding where the treasure's buried. We thought, well, is there a way that we could actually hide treasure within the building and get the audience to participate? And actually, will at some point over the 6-month run, someone actually find the treasure?
Huh.
We worked with the amazing Coney, another London theatre company, to realise that. And it was a really interesting challenge, which I think theatrically, I mean, what Coney built was amazing, but it was a total failure in terms of rhythm and sensibility, because you had
Mm.
90% of audience floating around in their fever dream of the show, and then you had, and they'd be at a proper underwater tempo, really slowly moving through the space, and then suddenly you get someone barrel up and say, "Have you seen the Goldberg?" And they would be in pure mission mode, wouldn't be able to absorb any of the atmosphere. In fact, it was just pure binary: yes, no. Can I complete the next stage? And the collision was so sort of brutal that we actually had to sort of take away the Goldbug from the show duration and remount it on our dark day, because the two different audience drivers would each was destroying the other one's experience.
Mm. That
So that's
makes
my challenge now. Is I really want to come back to that, because I really believe in objective and mission, and how do you level up within this sort of work? There's a doorway that's locked and you can only access it if you're a level 5 audience member. It feels like it's the ultimate in sort of democratizing the work, or like it's a proper meritocracy. Actually, the harder you work, literally, the more access you can gain. So I think there's loads to be excavated there. But
yeah.
how do you avoid breaking the tonal rhythm of it?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's like, how do you harness that audience energy to solve, to be, if nothing else, amusing to everybody else, so that when someone comes up with that gold fever of like, have you seen the gold bug,
Yeah,
that it enhances the experience of everyone else who's floating through the world,
yeah,
and doesn't feel like they belong there somehow,
yeah,
like something about building the world so that that feels natural, and for those who are on the float can just either be amused, or if they want to get wrapped up into it, or be discomfited in the proper way, of
yeah.
just a reminder of like, oh yes, there are those strivers in the world.
It's
um
absolutely, I totally agree. But what's interesting is it doesn't work with the mask form, because
mm,
the mask removes the rest of the audience, I hope. Yeah, but that's that. And so you work as individuals. So actually, I think it would only work in a different kind of construct where the audience are present.
Speaking of maths for a second, I remember there was an experiment being run, I think by some folks at MIT.
Oh yeah,
with like the mask got rigged up so there were little electrical impulses. They were like running someone through the
Yeah.
McKittrick like they were a rat in a maze.
Yeah, that was a great little test. In fact, if anything, the tech wasn't quite there at the point. It was very weighty, but MIT did some amazing things. So the idea was, in fact, we're kind of starting to look at it here now, but in a different way. But what the experiment was could a live audience member in McKittrick and Sleep No More partner with someone at home in front of their computer digitally and have a shared experience. And so, where we set this up was that the live audience member, before they went into the show, went into a little unused room, and there was a Ouija board, and they would be encouraged to sort of play with the Ouija board. And I wish we still had this bit of gear because it was absolutely amazing. And they could say, "Is there anyone there?" And the little cup would go to yes. But it's automated, but it's actually being controlled by someone on the computer who's typing in yes. And they say, "What's your name?" And the person could write in their name and they go. And the idea being that the person who was at home in front of their computer had woken up on the banks of a river but didn't know who they were, and they've got to try and work out. They've got amnesia, and they need to try and remember who they are. And to do that, they need to piggyback on someone in the world of the living and unpick it. And so the person in the real world would be asked, they would say, "I need your help. Will you help me?" And if the person in the real world said yes, then that spirit in the other place, in the underworld, would then beam in to bone-conducting headphones that were logged in the mask. And suddenly, anything the digital audience member typed on their computer would be spoken through the voice of a 7-year-old girl
Oh my
into the
God.
head of the
Oh
live
my
action
God.
audience member.
Oh, that's so creepy.
Yeah, it was quite creepy. And then the two of them would embark on an adventure in the show. And so you'd be essentially possessed as a live action audience member. You'd have a voice in your head who would sometimes agree with you and sometimes want to go a different way. And I think it had such an exciting sort of the bare bones of a brilliant show in its own right. But again, I think it's a similar thing to Mask of the Red Death, where while Sleep No More was happening, having this, which was mission driven, was in opposition to the rhythm of the show. So it was a block. Also, you had a mobile phone, a cell phone strapped to your mask as well, which was awkward.
Yeah.
But it'd be great to come back to that, and like the idea of how the digital world and the live action world can fit together is something we're totally looking into, because that is also the future.
Well, and I'll take this moment. Before we started, I mentioned PC games, and
Oh yeah.
you went off for a second. So, you do you get a chance to play in that space a lot, or are there things that draw you in? Is there anything right now that's fascinating you, because you've got this part of you that's definitely deep into the digital world as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of experimenting with an array of different game mechanics to try and work out what we can live. We've got a couple of projects, multiple projects that are looking at how we combine the two. So I've been playing lots of Elden Ring, like I imagine most of the video games community has, just because that set of mechanics is absolutely genius. The idea of failing to move forwards, that you need to learn from your mistakes. What's the theatrical equivalent of that? What's the idea of sort of gradually leveling up, of tuning your character, tuning your ability to move through the spaces that are inaccessible because you're not experienced enough? How do you then gain access a month later? That's very, very interesting. In fact, actually, generally sort of like open world RPG mechanics, I feel like it's what we're kind of doing to a certain extent by accident. So how can we do it deliberately? Yeah, it's I'm actually kind of just loving. Weirdly now, I find myself rather than watching films or television, devouring games, because I find myself just wanting to be in them. And
Have you played I'm about to freak a couple of my friends out. Have you played? There's a game called Inscription. Do you know about this one?
No, I do not. This because I'm going to have to write this down. What is it?
Okay, so it's spelled
Yeah.
INSCRYPTION. So Inscription, like that. Uh, and it's, you should give that one a whirl, because it's, what it's doing is, the base of it is kind of a card game, like
Yeah.
a bit like Magic the Gathering. And I've never been a big Magic person, but I still enjoy this. But this is one of those games where, like, where everyone's like, don't tell someone too much about it,
Oh yeah.
because there's things going on in it, and I'd just be very curious to see. You can get it on Steam.
Yeah. I'm
It's
looking at it
easy
now.
to
It
get.
looks
Like, yeah,
great.
give
I'm
it give it a whirl. Give it a whirl. Give it a see if you can see what's going on with it. So,
Um, and no, that sounds brilliant. And I mean, I've got a list of things that like immortality as well. I'm going to try and find some time
oh
to
yes,
do that because it feels like we start to experiment with TV, and it feels like I love basically my sort of personal uh, mission with any project is to try and break the rules of it. How can you break the rules of theatre and like
oh
how do you go break the rules of TV? And it's very hard, but it
you
feels
you
like
you
this
have to.
um,
Yeah,
is has broken real ground. So I
you have to play Immortality for figuring out how to break the rules of television. And if breaking the rules is your deal, you have to play Inscription. Like, double down on that one. And I'll give you one bit of advice on Immortality. This is not a spoiler. Either, if you play keyboard and mouse,
yeah.
make sure to have headphones. Make absolute sure. That's how I played. It went just fine.
Do you think I can
Headphone.
play it on an aeroplane with the old the Steam have released their handheld device?
Oh, with the Steam Deck.
Yeah.
Um, Look, there's a lot of nudity and sex scenes in it, so that depends on whether or not you want you want everyone to think you're watching an R-rated movie or maybe an X-rated movie on the airplane.
Yeah.
So that's fair enough as a warning. I don't know how it would be on a Steam Deck, because headphones are probably okay. Um, they did a lot of work for controller.
Yeah.
And there's a haptic loop in there that
Oh,
makes
really?
some things a little more legible. Um, but I sort of enjoyed playing keyboard and mouse because it made it feel like I was working at a digital workstation
Yeah, I love it.
on digital
Yeah.
film files. So there's a trade-off between the verisimilitude and the haptics of the controller. There's some people who are like, I missed an entire layer of this because literally for hours, because they weren't playing with a controller. But if you're wearing headphones, that's probably less. And knowing the way y'all layer your sound designs, I
Yeah.
think you'd pick up on what was being laid down.
Ooh, I can't wait. That's such a treat. It's
Yeah.
awaiting me.
I want to. I want once you've played them both, please report back. I really
Yeah,
want to
I
know
will
what
do.
you think
I
of them.
will do.
Video game hour. Yes, everyone drink. So, going back on track. When this is a generic question, but still, when did you know this form worked? Was there a particular moment in a production back in your undergraduate days, or when you first did the show for one person and were, kind of almost kidnapping, it wasn't kidnapping people, but like inviting people out, to somewhere
Yeah.
to go in by themselves? When did you know that this was viable and you could build, you know everything forward from it?
It was. I can remember exactly the moment. I can actually feel it now because it was probably when the path split and I took one fork. But when we did, so for my finals at university, I did. We had to use a found space. That's why I'd gone to this university purely because of this module at the end of the third year. And it was so I directed a production of Wojciech, a Georg Buchner play,
Oh yes.
and it gave birth to the Loop. It was like it's a 20-minute. We picked sort of you know 12 episodic scenes and just ran it in a loop, the same as we do with Sequel and Burnt City now. And I remember thinking we had a beautiful territory army barracks, which was completely overgrown. Like these corridors were
Oh my
entwined,
god,
like just nature was in control, and it
that's
almost
perfect for Wojciech.
Yeah, exactly. A thick veil of ivy covered everything. Lit up the candles and collected human hair from all of the hairdressers in Exeter for a month before to sort of do this sort of like homespun installations. Um, and remember, like 4 days before we opened, thinking this is good. It's atmospheric, but the audience get in the way, and having the epiphany that like, oh my gosh, if we just put the audience in masks, suddenly they disappear. And all of that, it's so crazy that the one project has basically, is informed everything. What was amazing about that was it only happened for one night in Exeter, and um, as was the way, all of the rest of my fellow directors and people who were at university, my year, came to see it. And it was very nice that my mates were supportive and my parents were very supportive. But there was one girl, a fellow, a peer, a lady in my class who we weren't that good friends. In fact, if anything, we didn't share that much in common, but she was there and she had to come. And afterwards, she came up to me and said, "Whoa, you know what? There is something in that. I mean, you should really do that again." And it was her seeing the sparkle in her eyes, that was a really truthful response. That there was a magic there, and it was her encouragement, Emily, that maybe try it one more time, and kept on trying until we are sort of 22 years later. So, and I think maybe that speaks to sort of the belief that what I'm all about is the individual, and as long as one person, it makes them gasp, makes the hairs go up on the back of their neck, then we've won. Then that's you've managed to sort of alter someone's being, and it's all worthwhile.
I can't think of a better place for us to land the plane. So, Felix, this has been delightful. I'm so glad I finally got a chance to talk to you. Burnt City's playing in London, Sleeping Wars in New York and Shanghai. You're all in the laboratory cooking up more alchemy, I imagine.
Yeah, sure are, and it's been an absolute delight talking to you. And I would love to come back and share thoughts of the games and future projects as we're allowed to talk about them.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you so very much.
Once again, I want to thank Felix for being our guest on the show this week. We're going to get him back. I want to hear what he thinks about Inscription, and what he thinks about immortality. That is just the thought of it's too delicious. Should we make Felix our official PC games reviewer? If only I had won the lotto this week, I would pay for that. So yeah, no, sorry everybody, didn't buy that ticket in Altadena. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows and no more begging for Patreon backing. That's what would happen the second I get the lotto. I'm not going to try and bring myself down because I'm feeling good. I'm feeling really good for the first time in 3 years. Yeah, for the first time in 3 years, because this past weekend was the Dig, the Denver Immersive Gathering, and we pulled it off. It wasn't an easy thing, and I think everyone who was there knew at certain points we were clearly in over our heads in certain ways. But luckily, all of the stress was mostly on our side of the table, our side being Immersive Denver and my own, and not on that of the attendees. It was great to get a chance to see some of you there. Particularly got to see some of my sustaining backers. Of course, Lonnie Hands-On was there. I stayed at Lonnie's place. He's got this little garret above his workshop. I got to tour Camp Christmas. I am agog at what Camp Christmas has turned into from the year when I was like coaching Lonnie through some stuff and talking about what the project could be. We did some consulting on that. And watching it grow and watching it develop, and what it started out as to what it is now, which is taking over this historic sort of living museum space with all these amazing buildings. I wish I could go back. I wish I could go back and see it once the build is done. Very exciting. Really had a wonderful fishbowl conversation facilitated by Betty Hart, who is one of the assistant directors on Theater of the Mind, which is there. Lonnie was the first person to kick it off, had a great bit. And then they brought on some local Denver artists, folks from Odd Knock, folks who are working on Theater of the Mind, and, David Byrne, the David Byrne, Talking Heads David Byrne, also came into the fishbowl. It was just really, really magical. We got the Star Cruiser team out there. So we had Ann Morrow Johnson and Sarah Thatcher and Michael Tara Garver, and also running around with Scott Trowbridge. Just a really fantastic. I'm still watching everyone together, watching everyone talk, watching friend groups meet each other. Like my own friends meeting each other, like from different places for the first time, watching folks we've known for years, talking to people we just met. Oh, Win Thorne was there, another one of our sustaining backers. Who else? Elaine was there. Just really fun to see that whole crew. Love getting everybody together. Got to meet Katrina, who's our Toronto correspondent. Got to meet Danielle Look, who's our Denver correspondent for the first time. Got to meet one of the folks, I think they don't want me to mention their name, who's like helping us out on everything immersive, helping like fill out the thing. I at some point maybe they'll let us say like who it is. Because I want to thank them publicly. Just getting to see members of the team we've never met before in person, getting to watch everyone connect, knowing that got to see Nicholas Fortuno, who's been covering some stuff for us in New York. I feel like it's Romper Room, and I see Ivan, and I see Betty, and I see I could do that all day. One day maybe I will do it all day. Maybe we'll do an irregular where I do that. But just really, it's been a long time coming. A lot of we had 2 events that got canceled because of pandemic. First because of the original wave 1, and then because of Omicron at the start of the year. And look, I knew I was broken. I was broken by all of that. I knew I was broken. And right now, sitting here talking about the event, it's becoming clear to me how broken I was. I carry myself differently right now because of what was pulled off and the way everyone just kind of came together. So I look forward to making more of this kind of work for all of you. Look, I'm going to drop in on Brett Jackson's Imagine Ne'er-Do-Wells this month, coming here in Los Angeles. So hope to see some of you there for that. But we're also going to get some meetups happening, probably not a monthly. I think we're going to get a quarterly meetup going in Los Angeles. Of course, there is the meetup that's happening next week in New York at Gymnopedie. That's already booked out. We're going to get more of those going on in New York. We're going to get those going in anywhere we have life. The Immersive Experience Network in London, they've got some meetups and some summits going on. We're intending to be working with them, to be doing some stuff with them in London. Just want to get the community together. We benefit so much from seeing each other. We benefit so much from trading information with each other in person, real time. It's who we are at heart. And I'm very excited. We definitely have plans brewing for next year. A lot of that I hope to come together in the next few weeks and to be able to tell you exactly what's going on at the top of the year. Just really, really, really very, very, very excited about where all of this can go. Of course, at the same time, seriously, need that support on Patreon. Need folks to come through. If you've got discounts or special offers or tickets you want to give away, all of that we can do. All of that helps make the Patreon more valuable for the people who pay in. I don't want to put all this stuff behind a paywall. That's an option. I don't really want to turn ads on the podcast and then put the unad version under the paywall. I don't even think I'd make more than like $5 that way anyway. It's not worth the effort. Don't want to do any of that stuff. Just know that we really do run off the generosity of the community. And all I want to do is work harder. All I want to do now is work smarter and better. All I want to do is get enough resources that we can pay more people to do more service journalism, to do more features, to do more. Because this whole thing is growing. This whole thing, I want to create more avenues for opportunity. I don't want to just have it be that, themed entertainment slurps us up. I don't want it just to be that the big companies that have emerged into our space control it all. I want them to succeed. I want them to grow, but I also want the independent companies. I want folks who just have a dream and a good idea and a lot of enthusiasm. I want to make sure that they're doing the best work that they can and that we're telling everyone about it. And I mean everyone. I want the world to know. So, that Patreon, please. What else is up? Next week, we've got Scarlett Kim of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. She's coming through to talk about Quills Fest, which is on right now. This is a VR accessible performance and XR festival that's happening. It's happening through both the Vast platform on PC, but also they've got a browser accessible version of it this time out. That's going to be running the whole month. Tickets are just $10. I'll put the note in the show notes. Scarlett's going to be on next week to talk about that. Also hoping to get another short interview with someone. That isn't in the can yet, so I don't want to say what it is. Plus, a little bit later in the month, we're going to do our gift guide. We're going to do the gift guide live on the podcast. Well, not live, we'll record on the podcast. And then we've got a few more fun interviews coming up. They're scheduled. Some cool things to talk about. We're going to be talking about Overlook, which is coming back next year in a big way. And just, you can tell, I think you can hear in my voice just how much this has been a big recharge and how important it was for me to see all your faces. All right, let's get on with the next part. So, gonna do the credits now. I'm gonna let you go for the week. I was gonna talk more about the jig, but maybe I'll do that in a regular. I don't know. Per Alex Klum's request, there will be a backer only episode where we talk about Andor because I'm obsessed. He asked for it, so we're gonna get it. And I just gotta find. I'm asking a couple of people who I love talking about this stuff with if they'll come on with me and we can do a deep dive. But scheduling everybody is tough, but that'll happen before Andor is over. I guarantee. We'll probably do two. One before it's over and one afterwards. Okay. The associate producer of this podcast and the rock upon which we're building much of this church these days is Parker Sella. Music for No Proscenium is by Chris Porter of the Speakeasy Society and Solar the Podcast. Special thanks to Siobhan O'Loughlin for voicing our intro. See you soon, Siobhan. And this podcast is written, edited, hosted, produced, and mixed by this madman right here. I'm Noah Nelson, and until next time, I'll see you at the show.